Hi, this is the Big Brains by Innvocon, wherein we discuss with the entrepreneurs and relevant industry stakeholders on all things business, startups, and the future of work. And our guest for the day is Stephanie Michelsen, co-founder of Jellatech and the board advisor for multiple startups and companies and a Forbes 30 under 30 alumni, obviously. So, Stephanie, thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we'll jump straight away to the questions. What does Gelatech do? If you could just give a elevator pitch for our audience, what does your company do? Yeah.
Yeah, so we are a biotech startup company. We are 3.5 years old. And basically what we do is we build the future of complex protein production. So we are using biotechnology and cell culture to make complex proteins in a much more scalable, sustainable, and efficient way. Based in North Carolina, Raleigh, and my background is in biotechnology.
Fantastic. So if I'm not wrong, you were a part of the biotech showcase at Slush this year, and
Yeah.
I was sitting there, witness your entire presentation from the last row. Just wanted to know, how do you see the problem that you're solving on a global scale? How big is the problem, and
Mhm.
how do you plan to solve the problem in the market you're currently operating geographically?
Yeah, so I guess a little background of I guess reason for why I started the company. So, the first protein we're working on is collagen, and it's derived to gelatin, which currently I think people probably know mainly in like the food and beverage industry. So that's kind of the space in which we were born. And so today, we rely on animal agriculture for a lot of the proteins,
Right,
ingredients, materials, and so on
right,
that we use. And that goes into definitely food and beverage, but also cosmetics, personal care, biomedical, pharma, materials, and so on. And that's an issue because, we're having to rely on such a harmful way of producing, proteins. As animal agriculture, it's one of the major greenhouse gas emission contributors. And so I really wanted to build something that was much more sustainable and much more scalable. And today, we have biotechnology tools that are, we can take kind of what exists in nature and then we can improve it and basically make it much more efficient. And we can do it in a way in which we don't have to use these harmful practices and don't have to use as much time, as much land, and harm animals as well, or so on. So that's really what we do with Jellatech. So we have built a platform to basically grow the same proteins that we use and love in the lab rather than having to rely on animals, and in
right.
some cases also humans, because we also do human proteins. But that's really kind of the inspiration for starting the company. And yeah, now we're scaling up and basically, and we're industry agnostic. We have applications across industries, as I just mentioned, and doing so in again like a decentralized way of just viewing kind of, instead of having farms, we now have labs.
Absolutely fantastic. So that's actually interesting. And what interests me more um, is knowing, when did you realize the potential of cellular agriculture? And
Mhm.
in detail, if you could just let our audience know if gelatin and collagen, if they have any
Mhm.
other use cases beyond the realm of food.
Yeah, so I actually, before starting my company, I was working in different biotech startups, and one of them was in the alternative protein space, which is basically like any effort to, provide proteins, but outside of animal agriculture, right? So like doing so without any animal input. And there's different methods. There's, technologies like fermentation. There's cellular agriculture, as you mentioned. There's also plant-based sciences, and collagen and gelatin is a very highly used. It's the most abundant protein in most animals and in humans, and it's used in the food and beverage space. And I mean, many applications, whether it being yogurt or being like confectionery, it being like clarification of wine and beer. So that's some of like the common food applications. And right now, the only way of getting this protein is from animals. So like, I wanted to build a way that didn't have to rely on animals, make it more sustainable, right? And actually, what we learned through building the company is that this protein, or these complex proteins broader than collagen, actually has applications in many other industries. So also like personal care, cosmetics. I'm sure people have seen collagen skin creams and so on to make you look younger and beautiful and so on. But also in medical applications, it's widely used. So whether that be for like tissue regeneration or like wound healing and so on, it's a really important protein. And right now, again, the only way of getting it is really from human or animal tissue,
Animals,
and so
right?
that doesn't really seem really ethical or sustainable or even like efficient. So with Jellatech, we use cellular agriculture, meaning that we basically grow cells and kind of milk or extract protein from those cells rather than to have to like wait and grow like an animal for 3 to 5 years or wait for a human to pass and then they donate a body to science and we extract it from tissue. It just doesn't really make any sense. So that's kind of how we solve that problem.
Okay. So means you mentioned that you actually manufacture proteins. So is it like
Yeah.
manufacturing in a lab or you have a manufacturing large factory sort of manufacturing unit? So how does it work?
Yes, so we're still, I mean, we're 3.5 years old, so we're still relatively small. And right now we're in kind of the early kind of scale up phase, and we're moving into pilot scale now. And up until now, we've been working more on like research and development, if you will. But basically, if you've ever been to like a brewery and you've seen some of those fermenters, whatever, where they brew beer, it's kind of like a similar process. But instead of growing yeast, we grow cells, so animal and human cells, and then we grow them up and then we kind of extract or like I call it like milking proteins for milking cells for protein. So that's similar way. So we get that same bioidentical, like really high value proteins from cells, and it basically looks like a lab with like fermenters in it.
Fantastic. So next question is something I call my trademark question. I
Hmm.
ask this from all of my guests. So what inspired your journey into entrepreneurship and
Hmm.
any motivations or any personal pivotal reasons that led you to
Hmm.
embrace the entrepreneurial path?
Well, I think I've always wanted to build something myself, and I've always had a very like entrepreneurial mindset, even from when I was a kid, I guess. And certainly, a lot of people might be motivated by, building a big successful company and make significant revenue or whatever. And like, that's great and all, but I think for me, it had to also have some sort of, positive impact. So like a lot of business today, they operate at the expense of the planet and health. And I wanted to, build a successful company that actually also improved that didn't leave a sort of negative footprint behind. So that was kind of my inspiration for, starting Jellatech and entrepreneurship. I've always been passionate about. My idols have always been entrepreneurs. That's the people that I looked up to, kind of taking an idea, turning into a product, and then beyond that, for me, it had to also have a positive impact.
Fantastic. So I was just means while preparing for this podcast, I was just going through one of the publications, online publications that mention your seed round,
Yeah.
just 5 or 6 months back, I guess, and it mentioned that your seed round was oversubscribed. So
Yes.
yeah, so just wanted to know, out of curiosity, means what did you actually pitch to the investors? How
Hmm.
did you pitch to the investors? And how many meetings did it actually take for you to convert or build up that round?
Yeah, so I mean, we started off like right 3.5 years ago. We did a pre-seed round, which ended up being around like 3 million US dollars, and then mainly for doing proof of concept, developing the technology, and proving that we couldn't grow the same protein, in an animal independent way, and doing so via cell culture and biotechnology. So we proved that, and then the seed round was all about taking that and then scaling it up. So we needed to raise funds to scale it up and get our technology to a place where it's through pilot scale and it's ready for sort of commercial scale handoff, if you will, like that. Now we kind of prove it, we can now scale it, it is efficient, and then expand the portfolio of proteins as well that we're doing. So I mentioned collagen and its derivative gelatin, which is our first uh, protein, but also there's many other animal and human proteins that are really really high value and that we can't currently sort of efficiently extract or get from nature. And so that's what I pitched to the investors is, scaling it up and getting some commercial traction, expanding the portfolio of cells that we use and also the proteins. And in terms of how many calls, I don't know. I mean, certainly, we spoke to a bunch of investors. We had some existing investors that participated in the round as well. We brought in some new ones, which was super exciting. And yeah, we ended up getting oversubscribed, which is in these times was really exciting because it's been a
Absolutely.
little rough for fundraising this past year and a half or so. So yeah, we're very excited to have so much interest for what we're doing, and obviously having proven that we actually have a really valuable product and a unique sort of sales position. So yeah, it took a little while to find the right fit, of investors, but I think We got some really good ones on board, and now we're scaling up aggressively.
All right. So any blueprints or plans for a follow-up funding round? So when are you planning to raise?
Yeah, that kind of depends. I mean, now we're moving into a new facility here in the spring, which is sort of like our pilot facility, which is really exciting. And then we'll take it through that. I expect our Series A to be around maybe like fall of this year, maybe spring of next year, kind of depending on some of the revenue and the partnerships that we're currently in discussions with that might push it further out. But that's probably when we'll be raising our Series A.
Okay. So my question, something related to the product. So
Mm-hmm.
deep tech companies, product building in deep tech companies is not as same as in software companies or in tech service based companies. So means like in these companies, a person can directly, a team of a person, people, so they can directly develop the product or maybe lead the product. So how does
Mm-hmm.
product development or maybe product updates in Jellatech work where there are multiple non-tech natural components or factors involved?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very different from software because we're dealing with, I mean, we're dealing with technology, but we're also dealing with bio. Some of the challenges is that there are certain things where having more people or kind of throwing more money at a problem can make it move faster, and then you have a biological element where like no matter how much money or people or brains you throw at it, it just takes the time that it takes. I mean, it's biology, so like cells, they usually take about 24 hours to divide, and that's something that's just inherently how things are. So it's definitely very different from, I guess, what I imagine like a tech company is, where you can have multiple people working on similar things, and so we're kind of balancing out like how do we efficiently use our resources and the people we have to like make the most progress in the shortest amount of time, and where are the things that we can't move any quicker on, that doesn't really matter to throw more efforts at. So like that's definitely like a balance that I think we have been nailing so far and will continue to do. But it's also a very frustrating part, right, where like you want some things to move faster but they just can't.
Fantastic. So another question related to, let's move from tech to business or taking the product in the market. So entrepreneurs, if we talk in the pre-COVID era or post-COVID era, they have failed in the correct alignment of the GTM, whatever the product be it be. So, how did you get the right mix of getting your go-to-market strategy in place?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean we're pre-revenue company, right? So like for us, it's it's taken years to develop the process and the technology around it, and now we're finally at a place where not only do we have that sort of like nailed down, but it's also now that we have more kind of we have larger scale, we have more capacity, right? So as soon as we were getting product enough, we actually have been sending and selling some samples to get kind of third-party validation that the product that we make is indeed what people are looking for. It does solve the problems that people are facing, and it is a true not replacement, it is real protein in the right way. So that's something we did as soon as we could, and that's been kind of like part of our go-to-market strategy. And then now we're aggressively scaling up, and there's obviously like little kind of hurdles in terms of every step you take. There's some learning curves. But now we're getting into a place where like the volumes are bigger, we can do more, we have more bandwidth, and so now we're also aggressively chasing that significant revenue too. And some of them are going to be through kind of more partnership, or like some of it could be like through licensing and stuff like this. But definitely we've been identifying the right partners for us to work with at this stage, and then looking forward like who's going to be the next partners that we're going to try to target and work with, because that can change, right? Like some customers may look for small volumes and high purity, and other ones are looking for really high volumes and don't really care about purity. So it's all about kind of identifying who fits in where and at what stage, and also learning how to say no to things, because as much as like I want to do it all, that's like I guess like a very kind of entrepreneur mindset. I want to do it all, but also understanding that there are limitations, and like every time you say yes to something, it's kind of taken away focus or time from something else. So
Right.
that's something that's been really kind of core, and our success so far has been to like navigating and really kind of prioritizing the right ones, and making sure that if you say yes to something, that it's still aligned to like the overall goal and mission, and kind of the KPIs and whatever that the company needs to hit.
Absolutely. So the next question, obviously, it comes something out of my curiosity, and the audience is obviously they're
Mhm.
listening. They'll agree as well. So just curious to know, how does the tech component at Gelatech work? Or I may ask, what's the role of technology in producing sustainable,
Mhm.
ethical, and scalable protein yield?
Mhm. So basically it's through biotechnology, right? So it's like we are engineering biology, so DNA itself, making the cells, so part of what we do is that, you have cells and like usually if you take a cell from like a human or an animal, they will grow for a certain time in the lab and then they'll kind of die off or they'll start acting weird or whatever. But you can use biotech to engineer those cells to basically, it's almost like giving them cancer, which sounds horrible, but really what they do is that now suddenly they keep kind of dividing on and on and on. So you can develop these cell banks. And so that's one component, which is like actually engineering and using tech to tweak the DNA and the biology and the behavior of the cells. And then there's a technology aspect of like the process in which how you grow the cells, right? So now we figured out the individual component. Now it's like, how do we get the cells to grow the fastest? How do we get them to make as most protein as possible? And then how do we scale it up, which involves like hard tech, so like actual vessels and bioreactors and so on. And then it's all about reiterating and like optimizing it, getting more out for everything you put in, and that's obviously like a bigger continuous thing. But that's part of how I guess technology plays into what we do.
Right, fantastic. So, again, a question related to sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Means I heard Nico Rosenberg during the first day at Slush talking about
Mm-hmm.
sustainability and investment in climate tech and sustainability. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you visualize it, or maybe how do you see the investments flowing down in climate tech, or specifically the startups working on a sustainable future? In
Mm-hmm.
maybe a couple of years of time. So how do you see the funding flowing in?
I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of like impact funds or like climate tech focused funds, which is great. I think it's all like great efforts and so on, but you have to at the end of the day build a company that's sustainable in terms of not just climate but also financial sustainability. So like you might be solving a really important problem, but at the end of the day you need something or someone to fund it, and so you need to have a target to get to profitability, right? Like
Right.
first off it's like, can we do this? And the next thing is like, okay, can we make some revenue? And then it's like, okay, how do we make it profitable? I think that's maybe one of the hard things about like impact and climate and so on. It's like you have to build a sustainable business, right? And I think also, and that some businesses maybe they can, some businesses they do it right away, and other ones might take a few years of development and research to get there. So I think very much like in terms of like investment, you need to be very aligned with your investors in terms of like what is that timeline of getting to profitability or getting into that place where like now the business is self-sustainable or that you get acquired or exit, whatever may happen. But I think just aligning with it, because definitely some investors might be very how do you say, not aware of like the timeline. So I think just aligning that, being realistic about it, and also like that things you do at the early stage, when you're raising venture money or whatever, like at some point you need to be profitable. So like how do you
Absolutely.
get there as soon as possible and like as sustainably as possible?
Absolutely. So last question, final question before we close down the session. What's your blueprint to take Gelatech's impact on a global scale?
Um, I mean, for right now, we're obviously doing like impact and taking it to a global scale. I think for us, we're experts in what we do, right? So we can nail down like the cell line development, the process, and the scale up. But taking our technology from like big to huge, I think identifying the right partners to do so with is going to be the best path forward. Because if we go and do it all ourselves and raise even more, venture money to go in and like that may not be the best way and the quickest way. I think the most efficient is kind of looking at, sort of parallel industries, or like looking at existing protein producers or collagen and gelatin manufacturers. Like there's a lot of translatable tech and even like infrastructure that we can actually kind of tweak to our process, where instead of relying on, let's say, animal tissue, now
Right.
it's cell derived, right? So I think that's our kind of strategy, is to identify the right partners to do so. And then I think the beautiful thing about what we do is that we don't have to have these massive, plots of land to grow feed, and then massive plots of land to then grow the animals, and then take time. Like, you can actually decentralize protein production now, because all you really need is cells, and you need a lab, and it's all happening under one roof, like from growing it to making the protein to extracting and purifying. And so I think that's like the future I see, is like decentralizing and having kind of like different like hubs in different areas of the world where you can have local production.
Absolutely. So, thanks a lot, Stephanie, for taking out the time, joining me for the session today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you and knowing about the future of biotech and the future of protein yield with ethnicity and sustainability.